Darkness surrounded him from the moment he awoke. It seemed to squeeze every corner of his consciousness, leaving no room for light or hope. The place where he found himself was as grim and oppressive as his own thoughts. A painful, throbbing ache in his head matched the pounding of his pulse in his temples. The world around him was blurry but real enough for him to understand that something had gone wrong. He should have been at home, in his cozy apartment. But instead, his eyes met gray walls covered in grimy stains, and the air he breathed had a chemical tang to it. Dmitri couldn't remember how he ended up here. It felt like a piece of time had vanished from his memory, as if someone had erased an entire portion of his life. He sat up from the iron bed he was lying on, and his muscles immediately protested with dull pain. "What the hell?" he croaked, looking around. The room was filled with more beds like his, some empty, others occupied by people or what had once been people. Their bodies looked like mummies dried out, with skin stretched over bones. They didn't move, but it felt like something was watching from behind them. Dmitri's heart started beating faster. He jumped up from the bed, staggering. His head spun, but he forced himself to move. He needed to get out of here. Somewhere deep in his mind, a thought flickered: this place looked too much like a psychiatric hospital. But what could have brought him here? He couldn't recall any accidents or hospitalizations. His last memory was of a regular morning at the office, a typical workday. And now this. His footsteps echoed loudly in the corridors as Dmitri carefully walked forward. Soon he noticed that exposed wires hung from the ceiling, and the flickering lights barely illuminated the rooms, casting eerie shadows. From one of these flickers, he thought he saw something move at the far end of the hallway, barely discernible in the darkness. "Who's there?" he asked loudly, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. But the only answer was silence, broken occasionally by the crackle of electricity and a soft scraping sound, like something or someone was dragging across the floor, leaving a trail behind. He quickened his pace, looking from side to side. All he saw were closed doors, locked offices. Some bore old, worn-out signs: ward, doctor's office, sanitary room, but none of them opened. His fear grew with each passing step, with each new realization. He was not alone in this place. As he passed another door, Dmitri suddenly stopped. Through a small glass window, he saw movement. Someone was inside. He cautiously stepped closer and peered in. The room was small, with an iron table in the middle, covered with tools that looked surgical. But the strangest part was the figure sitting at the table, back turned to him. "Hey," Dmitri called out, and the figure slowly turned. The face he saw made him recoil in horror. It was only partially human. One half of the face was covered in thin, translucent skin through which the muscles and tendons were visible. But the other half didn't belong to a person. Horribly deformed, with oozing growths, it looked like it had been stitched together from different creatures. "You are here," a quiet, rasping voice said. "You finally arrived." Dmitri stumbled back. His mind couldn't process what was happening. What was this thing? And what was it doing here? He didn't wait for an answer. Turning, he ran, his steps shaky but driven by sheer panic. The corridors twisted and turned, and soon he realized he was going in circles. The doors he had already passed by were reappearing on his path. His panic grew. Something was clearly wrong in this place, something beyond his understanding. This wasn't just a hospital, it was a maze, designed to confuse, to make you run in circles, losing hope. After what felt like hours of running, he suddenly stopped in front of a massive door he hadn't seen before. It had no signs or labels, just a heavy, rusted surface that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. Inside, something told him, were the answers. Or the end. He reached for the handle, but before he could touch it, the door creaked open on its own. A dark room lay beyond, illuminated only by a dim light coming from somewhere above. In the middle of the room stood a strange object on a high pedestal, an enormous mirror, surrounded by candles. Its reflection was hazy, as if covered by a layer of dust, but Dmitri could see himself. Or rather, he saw something that resembled him. The reflection moved with a delay, as if it was out of sync with his own movements. Dmitri slowly stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the strange image. As he approached, the reflection stopped mimicking him and began to change. The shadow in the mirror began to stretch, his facial features growing grotesque, and the figure twisted into something monstrous. The reflection was no longer his, it was a creature from his nightmares, his deepest fear manifesting before his eyes. He realized it too late. As soon as the understanding hit him, dark hands reached out from the mirror, grabbing his wrists. He tried to fight, to pull away, but the force pulling him into the depths of the horrifying reflection was irresistible. When silence returned to the room, the mirror no longer reflected Dmitri. It was calm again, though the slight flicker of the candles hinted that something had changed. Soon, the darkness reclaimed the space, as it had before.